Hi, everybody. Well, it's 40 years ago today that we lost Elvis Presley when he died at the age of 42 on August 16th, 1977. And I wanted to do a video commemorating that, remembering Elvis, but I didn't really know what it was going to be about. And then I thought for a long time, anticipating this, that maybe what I would do is just tell my personal story with my friend Mike, who has passed away. He passed away in 2010. He was a big Elvis fan. I mention him frequently, and I would tell you how I started out being kind of like a little bit of an Elvis fan, to going through a period where I really didn't think much of Elvis, to a period where I became a much bigger fan. Okay, and I'm going to start by saying that I guess the way it starts is my story is that my mother was kind of an Elvis fan. She wasn't a collector or a big fanatic, but she had some records. She had some 45s. One of the earliest memories I have of my 45s was going through my mother's collection, and she had Teddy Bear on a 45, the RCA Victor original 45. And, my mother passed on a lot of 1950s appreciation to me by taking me to see American Graffiti and the movie Let the Good Times Roll, which was, I think it was a double feature, if I remember correctly, at the theater. And naturally, I gained a real appreciation for 1950s music. And I remember, I'm going to say the earliest memory of seeing Elvis on TV was in 1973 when he did his Aloha from Hawaii via satellite concert. And here's the album from that. And my mother had this album at one point. This was it was going to be a big event. So many millions of people were going to see this show, and my mother and I watched it. And at the time, I was 11 years old when it was broadcast. But I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think when I did my research one time, I think in my area, it wasn't really live. I think it was shown later after the fact. I could be wrong on that. Somebody will correct me. But in the New York, New Jersey type of area, it wasn't live. But what I remember about this particular show that stands out is the amazement I felt of the magnetism that this man had. It was my first real exposure to seeing a man really turn the ladies on, so to speak. And I remember this song Fever in particular, when he does Fever, and he would just like shake an arm or twitch a leg like that, and the girls would be like, oh, in the audience. And I remember, wow, what magnetism this guy has. I mean, to be able to do that to those ladies. I mean, I thought it was kind of funny at the time, and I guess it still is. But that's what stands out in my mind the most, that these women were like drawn to this guy. The sex appeal of this guy is what I remember most about seeing this when it was first on television in '73. I remember my mother had a pretty good record collection, and this was the first Elvis compilation album that really did it for me. I think this was 1976, possibly. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. 74, 75, 76. I think it was 76. You people know, I don't know as much about Elvis as I do the Beatles, but this was advertised on television a lot. My mother always ordered records on TV. She had the Columbia House Record Club. She joined that thing. I guess where you stick a penny, you send a penny, and they send you like 10 records or whatever for a penny or whatever it is, and you pay later. And she used to have this big long stereo console, in the house, and this was the record collection that I really liked. This is all his big hits on here, and this is where I really took notice of so much of the music. I played a lot of this. And this was the first album that I really recognized of Elvis and really had my mother's, I should say, and I played my mother's copy over and over again. So this is a very important record to me, and this is really the birth of my knowledge, if you will, of Elvis's music on here. I remember going out about this time and buying 45s at my local record store at the time. And they were the RCA with the red label 45s, the reissues. And I remember buying those. But then something happened. I wound up going to high school in late 76 and into 77 in that period. And I met my friend Mike, who I spoke about. I had a really nice picture of the two of us in his Elvis room with Elvis memorabilia prominent. But unfortunately, we have something going on here in my apartment in the other room where I can't get to the photo album now. But anyway, I always show this photo. And we'll let the train come. The mystery train pulls up just in time to show this picture, which I frequently show. That's my friend Mike, and that's me. This picture taken in 1993. By this time, a pretty big Elvis fan I am. But this doesn't really do his collection justice. All these records and CDs up here. There's Elvis albums. These are all Elvis. Everything in this books, everything is all Elvis. And it's only a small portion of his collection. And if you like, I have a couple of videos on his. You can go back, and I think it's called Elvis Collection of My Late Friend, if you want to do the search. So anyway, what happened was we grew up in high school. You know, we met when we were like 14, 15 years old. And I was a big Beatles guy, of course. And Mike was the Elvis guy. And at that period, I was kind of like losing interest in Elvis. And I was like, 14 years old, 15, we'll say around that, 14 to 15. When Elvis died in 77, I was 15. But I went through a period where my friend Mike was kind of getting interested in the Beatles. I was actually succeeding at turning him into a Beatles fan. So as we got into the year in 1977, he was becoming a real Beatleholic, and he was kind of like forgetting about Elvis. And a lot of the story that I'm going to tell, excuse me, a lot of the story I'm going to tell is going to be kind of regretful because it's not pleasant. It's kind of like something I'm ashamed of, but I was only 15 at the time, and you'll hear as I go along. Some of you who do not know this story, I think I've told it before, but so here we have my friend Mike and I. We're big music fans. I'm a Beatles freak, and I'm just starting to really get into the Beatles and collecting. I'm 15. It's 1977. I'm buying the Beatles Rock and Roll Music album in 76, a compilation piece that came out. And one of my biggest memories with Mike was one of the first time we ever, I think, got together in person, like outside of school, where his father was able to drive us to the local store, record store, a huge record store. They don't have any those anymore. And this would be in like spring of 1977, and the album The Beatles Live at the Hollywood Bowl had been released by the Beatles, Capitol Records. Mike was so into the Beatles, and he was like so getting into them, that he bought this up and he played this album constantly, and he really loved it, and he was becoming a Beatle freak, and I liked it that way. Hey, he's coming over to my camp, forgetting about Elvis, coming over to my camp, and here's where it starts getting shameful on my part. Well, now we get up to August of 1977, and I'm kind of converting Mike to the Beatles realm. And in my family, we had a lot of cousins. We'd get together from time to time, and we'd sit in the dining room. We had the dining room at my grandparents' house, and the long stereo console that my mother had was there, and we had the radio on. And it was my memory is that it was late afternoon on August 16th, 1977. We're playing cards, all of us. We're sitting around the dining room table. We're playing cards. We used to play card games, family card games with the cousins and the, aunts, uncles. And the radio's on, and we're listening to music, whatever station we were listening to. Probably CBS FM, an oldies station around here. And the report comes on that Elvis Presley has died. And I don't know why, but I was very indifferent about it. I really did, it was like, so what kind of thing. And it's really terrible, and I regret that. The only thing I have in my defense is that I'm a stupid 15-year-old kid. And it gets worse. right away, next day in school, I felt bad for my friend Mike. I know how much he loved Elvis, but I was kind of disappointed that he went, his allegiance went back to Elvis. Understandably so. I mean, now I understand that, but at the time I was like, oh great, Elvis died. Now Mike's back into Elvis again. Terrible. But he was brokenhearted, understandably so. And I had a cousin, one of my cousins, who was, if I was 17 at the time, he would be. I'm sorry, I'm thinking 77. No, I was 15 when Elvis died. So if I was 15, he was 3 years younger than me. So he'd be 12, my younger cousin. And he liked Elvis a lot. And one day we were outside playing, and I remember very vividly something that haunts me to this day. This is August of 77. And I was saying like, oh, forget about it. Elvis died, forget him. Or something stupid that young teenagers say. And my younger cousin, who's 12 years old, says to me, you wait until one of the Beatles dies. Who knew what would happen to John Lennon 3 years later? Not only would he die, but he'd be murdered. And I just remember saying to him, oh, the Beatles aren't going to die. They're young, you think they're young. They're young. They're not old yet. Or something like that. I said some stupid remark. Well, I live to regret that stupid thing that I said. Okay, so now we get into 1980. Say we're into the early 80s, and my friend Mike and I would go shopping together. We would go take a train ride into Manhattan. And in Manhattan in the early 80s, there were a lot of great record stores. That's where I got a lot of my Beatle bootlegs. Now, again, I had respect for Mike's love of Elvis. He collected only Elvis. I collected only the Beatles. And that's where I got all my first Beatle bootlegs and rarities. And we take these wonderful journeys into the city, in the Greenwich Village. It would be Greenwich Village that we'd go to, these wonderful underground stores where you could find all kinds of gems and gold nuggets of both Elvis and the Beatles. And then we'd have lunch. He'd buy a bunch of Elvis records, spend all his money. I'd buy a bunch of Beatle bootlegs and records and spend my money. And we were having great collections. And we'd go somewhere for lunch. Here's two guys, 18, 19, 20 years old. That's about when it was, 80 to 82. We're getting 18, 19, 20, 21. Those few years there. And we would love going shopping together. And we'd hang out in the stores. And then later on, eat dinner or lunch. Go to an Italian restaurant or something, and while we're waiting for the food to come, we'd be taking the records out of the bags and we'd be examining our records, and he'd show me stuff and I'd show him. But the thing that I always hated is that I used to like to rib Mike. I used to tease him all the time. I say, Elvis. I say, Elvis is for old ladies, I used to say. I know a lot of people probably still feel that way. I said, Elvis is like an opera singer. He's like a crooner. He's like Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. That's not rock. They call him the King of Rock. I used to say, baloney, King of Rock. Get out of here. I used to be terrible, but the thing about Mike is he was always able to take it well, and he was never flustered by it. I used to like to rib him. Well, that's what I mean when I say that I was ashamed making this video. I was going to be talking about some of that stuff too. Well, now we're going to zoom ahead to the positive stuff. I remember when I really became an Elvis big time fan. It was 1991. I don't know what it was about that period in time, but one day it hit me like a ton of bricks. I started listening to so much Elvis music, and by this time I was 29. I was just about to hit 30. I like to say that I really didn't appreciate Elvis the way I do now until I hit the age of 30, really. 29, really, but we'll round it off to 30 just to give the impact. And I remember I was just playing all the Elvis music I could, watching all Elvis movies, and all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, what struck me was this man's charisma. I got the charisma about it. It didn't matter that I used to tease Mike, he doesn't write songs, he doesn't really play instruments really, just a little bit. And I used to tease him with that. It didn't matter anymore. Elvis was great. He sang great. He moved great. He had power. He was a feast for the eyes and senses, and he really was able to be very alluring, So At the time that I really got into Elvis in 1991, I remember Mike and his then wife were vacationing somewhere. So I went on the telephone and I kept leaving all these frantic messages. Oh, I just watched this movie. I just bought this record. I just listened to this record. And I was saying, listen to this. And I remember singing songs. I would sing I would sing some verses of like, there's this one song, King of the Whole Wide World. I was singing, I loved his voice. I was trying to prove to Mike how much I was into Elvis. And the funny part of this story is his wife got really pissed off at me because I used all the tape on their answering machine over the course of their vacation. They came home, they played back their messages, and all they heard was me singing Elvis songs, boasting about how much I love Elvis, trying to explain to Mike, this is incredible, that I've turned the corner here, if you will. And I've been into Elvis ever since 1991. Elvis is never going to be, to me, as big as the Beatles for me. There's a funny thing in the movie Pulp Fiction. There's some scene that was not used where Uma Thurman is saying to John Travolta, now, you know, there are Elvis people and there are Beatle people. Now, you can like Elvis and you can like the Beatles at the same time, but you can't possibly like them both the same. One of them has to be bigger than the other. Which are you? And John Travolta says Elvis, you know. And then later on in the regular film that we know, even though that scene was edited out, there's a reference to there where the Uma Thurman character says to, I guess, Vincent Vega, the Travolta character, says, an Elvis man should love it. She says to him, she calls him an Elvis man. We don't know where that's from, but it's from the deleted scene. Anyway, that's about all I have to offer for Elvis's anniversary. And again, it's amazing how I go too far. I didn't want to go more than 9 or 10 minutes, and it's over 17. But yeah, I used to have no use for you know, watching Elvis movies and things. Now I do. You know, I can watch Elvis movies now and enjoy them for what they are. I don't know if this plays anything. This is a jukebox, and it does, but I don't know how to play it. Oh, maybe the battery's dead. But anyway, you know, it's a whole different ball game with me now. You know, I can watch. My friend Mike used to show me stuff like That's the Way It Is, and you know, Elvis on stage like Wayne Newton with that white Vegas costume on. I used to think it was so boring. I used to sit there bored out of my skull, say in 1980 or 1981. Whereas by the time we got to 1991 or 1992, I was really really into it. And now I could watch those movies and enjoy Elvis very much. The concert footage and also the movies that he made in the 60s even I enjoy. You know, and I'm glad that even though my friend Mike passed on in 2010, he was alive 20 years, give or take, to see my exuberance over the King. So anyway, here's a tribute to the King, everybody. Thanks for sticking with me and watching.